Hey investor friends, I'm Michelle Markey and today I'm going to speak with you about how to stop living from paycheck to paycheck so you can start investing. And if you recall from one of my prior videos, I talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs applied to personal finance and investing. And I created levels where people might be in a crisis and surviving stage where they're not able to overcome their debt and they're struggling to overcome some of that and not able to save a lot. And then when you get beyond that stage, you might reach being in a safe or growing level. And that's starting to be a little bit better of a financial situation where you're able to start putting away money that you've earned and able to maybe invest and keep your debts down. You could be feeling like you're living paycheck to paycheck in any of these financial hierarchy stages, but really you feel it the most acutely in the crisis and surviving stages, while you feel a little bit less in the safe and growing stages. My goal today is to help those who are feeling like they're in the most acute stages of crisis and surviving mode at least get to the point where they're feeling closer to the stages of safe and growing. And I know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, so what I'm about to suggest is an approach that can be helpful to you whether you're a young 20-something or you're a single mom with 3 kids. No matter what your financial situation is, there's always something you can do to improve it. So what I'm going to suggest is organized in 3 areas of being aware of the situation, taking an action, and then focusing on the results of those actions and being able to invest. It can feel really stifling trying to live paycheck to paycheck where you feel like you can never overcome your debt or you have significant financial obligations where it feels like you can never save. And I've been there and know that you can actually do something about it. The first thing I'd suggest for anyone who wants to stop living paycheck to paycheck is to become aware and accept your financial situation. So I know that can be difficult, facing your fears of what the ugliness of your credit card balances might look like, or your student loans or car loans, and adding all of that math up and then comparing that to whatever assets you might have in your savings or checking account. And it requires that we actually take a look at that. And some financial talking heads might say, know your budget and start creating a budget, but I find that to be a little bit rigid. What I'd rather do is just start with a simple notepad and a pencil and start writing down the things that you're aware about. So start with your accounts, what assets you have. So if you have a checking account, a savings account, any investment accounts that either you or your family members created for you, and any other kinds of financial assets you might have to your name. And then also start with figuring out your liabilities or debts. And liabilities means financial things that you're responsible for paying. So it's good to have an idea of what your liabilities look like, whether, like I said, they're student loans, car loans, childcare obligations like alimony, or other kinds of financial obligations that you're responsible in paying for. Once you have your assets and liabilities identified, I'd suggest totaling them up. So let's say you have $1,000 to your name in assets, and then you owe $30,000, which is a typical American average amount that a lot of people might owe. And then you'll come to quickly find that you have a net worth of negative $29,000 because you owe $30,000 to your credit cards, car loans, and student loans, let's say. But then you should start drilling down and start coming up with a schedule of when all of these liabilities are due and when your cash flow is coming in to pay them off. And then also take stock of your everyday living expenses like housing, utility, food, and transportation costs, and other areas where you might be spending a lot of money in that you think you might be able to cut down on. And take stock of that, as well as any income sources like from a job or otherwise. Congrats, you passed the first step of writing down your assets and liabilities. So keep this piece of paper in mind when you're going to refer back to your financial situation. And now it's time to take action. So what I'm going to suggest with taking action include figuring out ways you can cut costs and also figuring out ways you can earn more income. So cutting costs involve things like diving deeper into your credit card statements and finding out where you're spending your money, and also getting comfortable and confronting any areas that you might not feel very comfortable with. So if you're aware and you feel guilty about doing things like buying lots of stuff on Amazon, it's okay. You can forgive yourself for having bought those things. But now it's time to put our heads down like LeBron James and drive to the basketball rim and then score the basketball and get down to brass tacks and really start grabbing the bull by the horns and facing our discomfort with our spending in the past. So there's not much we can do about things that we've spent on, aside from maybe selling the stuff. So that's one way that you can start cutting down on costs and earning some money back, is by selling anything you don't really need. And then I'd also suggest looking at your food expenses and housing and figuring out, how can I save here? Maybe I should eat out less and eat more peanut butter and jelly sandwiches at home. It can be really cheap to do that. And then find ways to make more money. For example, if you're creative, you could sell artwork or crafts on Etsy. Or if you have unique skills, you could do some freelance work. Or if you have a job and you haven't gotten a raise in a while, I would actually go and ask for a raise. And if that doesn't work, then maybe you should consider finding another job or just get a second or third job to make ends meet. And another way to improve your likelihood of earning more is actually by developing highly skilled knowledge and abilities that make you employable at a higher salary amount. Taking this action that I'm about to talk about next can make the biggest difference in your bottom line, and it's paying off any and all debt that you have. So if you have debt that's at any interest rate, maybe above 2 or 3%, you need to prioritize paying that off as soon as possible, even before you think about having an emergency fund or investing. Notwithstanding, if you have the opportunity for a 401k and your employer matches, then maybe you could set aside whatever that amount is to get the match. And otherwise, if the company doesn't offer a match in your 401k, I would first focus on paying off your debt. Prioritizing paying off your debt doesn't mean that you can't have some savings, but it's just going to take a little longer to get to a place where you have enough for an emergency fund. And let's talk about some of what that might mean. So to have an emergency fund can mean having money set aside to pay for unexpected life expenses. This could be if you get sick with coronavirus and have medical bills, or you break your hand playing sports, and then again medical bills and surgery bills, or you have car repairs if your car breaks down. All of those things could be considered emergencies. And only 40% of Americans can afford a $1,000 emergency, and the average amount that people actually end up paying for emergency is around $3,500. So it's going to require a balance of paying off your debt while trying to increase a little bit of savings to have an emergency fund. And for example, let's say you earn $60,000 and the total across your rent and utilities, food and transportation costs, let's say that adds up to $2,000, and you get a biweekly paycheck of $1,500. And so over the course of a month, you get about $3,000. So of that, 2/3 of that $3,000 goes to your everyday living expenses. And this is a figure that you want to keep in mind if you're trying to save up for an emergency fund. And if you're feeling more secure, maybe having 1 month's worth of living expenses or $2,000 saved up in an emergency is enough for you. But if you're feeling less secure, like if you lose your job, maybe you need to have an emergency fund that's 3 to 6 months worth. So if you have 3 months worth of savings, that's $6,000 you're going to need just to survive across your housing, food, transportation. And then if you might need to survive 6 months, that's another $12,000 you're going to need just to cover these basics. So that's not even touching any loans, credit card debt you might have. So if you have $2,000 of monthly living expenses and then only $1,000 left to pay for everything else, like your current debt and then trying to set some of that aside for savings, it can be difficult to build an emergency fund. And if you need a 3 months worth emergency fund, it can take 6 months to save that if you had the entire $1,000 available to save. I know thinking about these things is no walk in the park, and it requires some discipline to embrace this idea of JOMO instead of FOMO, where you have to have the sort of mindset of joy of missing out to kind of save some money, while you probably are also experiencing some FOMO or fear of missing out from, say, life events. And sometimes it can be expensive just living life. Like if you go to your friend's wedding, it could cost you on average $430 just to attend that. So maybe something to think about is, if you're not really close to that friend and it's a wedding that you don't know if you'd really enjoy, maybe consider politely declining so you can save that $430 if you need to get out of the crisis and surviving mode. About a third of Americans will have an emergency. So when it comes to paying off the bill from this emergency, there are some financial things you can also do. So if you have the opportunity to use a credit card, I would go for one that has a 0% APR or annual interest rate that you can then have some time to pay off that bill. And I would only suggest doing this if you can be responsible with using credit cards. I wouldn't use a credit card to just grow a balance from interest on a credit card. So I would take advantage of this 0% credit card only if you know that you can actually pay off the obligation of that bill within the time frame that you have in the 0% promo period. And then otherwise you can try to negotiate down, let's say it's a medical bill or other kinds of car repairs, let's say, and you don't think that you can easily afford this. Try to work with the person that you owe to bring down what's due and get it to a reasonable amount that you can actually pay. Finally, you're starting to see the fruits of your labor and having some results of paying down your debt to the point where it's pretty manageable or you've paid it off entirely, and you also have an emergency fund. So I know that was hard, and I want you to pat yourself on the back because you deserve it. It's really hard to do all this and pay down debt while saving money, and it's not easy, like I said, but it can be done. And now it's time to celebrate, because now you can invest in your 401k more, or you can also start a Roth IRA and invest there. Now, having made it into the safe and growing stages, you finally feel less stress from having to live paycheck to paycheck. And with the results of having some money saved up, you can even start investing it more, and then hopefully growing your money to the point where your investments cover more than just basic living expenses, but can open up more doors of opportunities, like having experiences that you didn't think possible when you were living paycheck to paycheck. So if you enjoyed this video or learned something, please like and subscribe. And if you have questions, please leave them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer. I wish you well on your financial journey towards freedom. And till next time,